History remembers its generals, its conquerors, its kings. But sometimes, the fate of empires rests in the hands of a man no one truly knew. A man whose weapon was not a rifle, nor a bomb, but a secret. This is the story of Richard Sorge, the spy who walked the line between nations and changed the course of World War II without ever firing a shot. Young Richard grew up hearing two languages, two cultures, two ways of thinking. He was clever, restless, and full of energy, the kind of child who could never sit still. He devoured books about history, war, and philosophy. He dreamed of adventure, of purpose. Then came 1914, the year the world went mad. The Great War tore Europe apart, and like millions of others, 19-year-old Richard joined the fight. He enlisted in the German army, eager to prove himself. In the muddy trenches of the Western Front, he learned the cruelty of war, the kind that stripped away illusions and left only truth. A shell shattered his legs during a battle in Belgium. For months he lay in hospitals, surrounded by broken men and endless pain. It was there, in the silence between morphine and despair, that something in him changed forever. He began to question everything: his loyalty, his government, his beliefs. He read Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. He studied revolution and ideology. He began to see war not as glory, but as greed, a game played by the powerful. By the time the war ended in 1918, Richard Sorge was a different man. He limped out of the hospital with metal in his bones and fire in his heart, and he was done fighting for empires. Back in Germany, the post-war years were chaos, hunger, inflation, riots in the streets. The old world had died, and something dangerous was being born. Sorge finished his doctorate in political science, studying economics and politics at the University of Hamburg. He spoke of Marx, of Lenin, of the new Soviet experiment rising to the east. He joined the Communist Party of Germany, and soon after, the Comintern, the Soviet organization dedicated to spreading world revolution. It didn't take long for Soviet agents to notice him. He was German, brilliant, educated, and most importantly, convincing. He could pass as a nationalist or a socialist, a scholar or a soldier. He had a face that could wear any mask. In 1929, the Soviet Military Intelligence Agency, the GRU, recruited him officially. His mission: to gather information from Europe for the Soviet Union. They trained him in Moscow, in codes, dead drops, radio communication, and psychological manipulation. He learned to lie without blinking, to drink without getting drunk, to read a man's intentions from the smallest twitch. He was everything a spy should be, and more. The perfect actor, the perfect liar, the perfect patriot, for a country that would one day forget him. By 1930, he was already traveling through Europe under false identities. He reported from Germany, Britain, and Scandinavia. His charm opened every door. Women adored him, men trusted him. He could sit in a cafe, light a cigarette, and make a stranger confess his life story. But Moscow had bigger plans. Japan was rising fast, an empire expanding across Asia, threatening China and the Soviet Far East. Tokyo's government was secretive, its military obsessed with loyalty and discipline. The Soviets had almost no intelligence inside Japan. They needed someone who could walk among both Germans and Japanese, someone invisible, yet indispensable. In 1933, as Hitler came to power in Berlin, Richard Sorge was summoned to Moscow. The order he received would define his life. He was to go to Japan. His cover: a journalist working for pro-Nazi newspapers in Tokyo. His task: build an espionage network that could reach into both the German embassy and the Japanese government. It was a mission no one expected him to survive. In September 1933, Richard Sorge boarded a steamer in Europe and sailed east across the oceans, to a nation few outsiders truly understood. He arrived in Yokohama, Japan, posing as a writer for the Frankfurter Zeitung, one of Germany's most respected newspapers. He was 38 years old, handsome, confident, with piercing blue eyes and a disarming smile. He carried his typewriter, his notebooks, and a secret that could have cost him his life 1,000 times over. Tokyo was a city of contrasts: neon lights and ancient temples, rigid tradition and restless ambition. Foreigners were rare, and the Japanese police watched them carefully. But Sorge had something that made him blend in: charisma. He spoke with the authority of a German intellectual and the charm of a man who knew he belonged everywhere. Within months, he became a familiar face at embassy parties and diplomatic dinners. He charmed German officers, Japanese journalists, and high-ranking politicians. He drank heavily, laughed loudly, and listened quietly. And all the while, he was building the most dangerous spy ring in the East. He found his first and most important ally in Hotsumi Ozaki, a Japanese journalist who worked as an advisor to Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe. Ozaki was intelligent, idealistic, and quietly sympathetic to socialist ideals. He believed Japan's alliance with Nazi Germany would only lead to disaster. Together, Sorge and Ozaki formed an unlikely friendship, one built on trust and mutual purpose. Through Ozaki, Sorge gained access to Japan's inner political circle. Through the German embassy, he gained access to Berlin's military secrets. And through his brilliance, he connected both, creating a web of intelligence that stretched from Tokyo to Moscow. Each week, he sent coded reports via radio operators hidden across the city. Each transmission was dangerous, a few seconds too long, and Japanese signal police could triangulate the location. But Sorge was fearless. For 6 years, he fed Moscow priceless information on German-Japanese relations, Japanese troop movements in China, and political decisions made behind the emperor's closed doors. In a world where lies built empires, Richard Sorge's truth became the most valuable weapon on earth. A city shimmering with ambition, where honor and secrecy walked hand in hand. Here, beneath the fluttering banners of the rising sun, a foreigner lived among the elite, his every smile hiding 1,000 secrets. His name was Richard Sorge. To most, he was a charismatic journalist, the German correspondent who knew everyone, drank with everyone, and always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. But behind that easy charm lay the keenest spy the world had ever known. Every day, he walked a razor's edge between two empires, Berlin and Tokyo, and every night he wrote messages that could alter the course of world history. By now, his circle was expanding. His key allies were men who, like him, lived in two worlds. There was Hotsumi Ozaki, his loyal Japanese friend and link to the Prime Minister's office. Branko Vukelic, a Yugoslav journalist who passed information from other diplomats. Max Clausen, a German radio technician who built the network's hidden transmitters. And Anna Uramova, a Russian-born woman who acted as messenger and distraction. Each one risked their life. And each one believed that Sorge's mission mattered more than their own survival. Sorge's reports were masterpieces of precision. He described Japanese military buildups in China, the Imperial Army's movements in Manchuria, and the government's internal debates. He reported that Japan's war in China, begun in 1937, was draining its economy and stretching its military. He watched from inside Tokyo's smoky bars and elegant tea houses as the empire overreached itself. And all the while, he drank whiskey, sake, beer, anything that helped him blend in. He would laugh loudly, argue politics, and then, when the night was deep, slip quietly to his desk and write his real dispatches, messages that traveled across the Pacific to Moscow. He lived recklessly, almost theatrically. He roared through the streets on his motorcycle, hair flying in the wind, police sirens sometimes chasing him. The Germans adored him. Ambassador Eugen Ott, who headed the German embassy in Tokyo, called him my best friend. Ott trusted him so completely that he shared top-secret telegrams from Berlin, never knowing that those same papers were being copied and sent to the Soviets within hours. By 1938, Sorge was perhaps the most deeply embedded spy in the world. He had infiltrated the inner circles of two Axis powers, and both believed him entirely loyal. To Berlin, he was a patriotic journalist and member of the Nazi Party. To Tokyo, he was a respected foreign expert who understood Japan better than most Westerners. To Moscow, he was their man in the East, the eyes and ears of the Kremlin. But even geniuses have limits. The life of constant deception began to take its toll. He was surrounded by friends who would have shot him if they knew the truth. He could never truly rest. Every knock on the door might be the police. He drank more heavily, and his charm sometimes slipped into carelessness. Yet, through it all, his work never faltered. In 1939, when Europe once again plunged into war, Sorge's intelligence became even more crucial. He reported the progress of the Nazi-Soviet pact, Japan's reaction to it, and the uneasy tension between the two nations now technically friendly, but ideologically opposed. And then, in 1941, came the greatest test of his life, and his ultimate triumph. Early that year, Sorge received alarming information from inside the German embassy. The Nazi regime was preparing for a massive invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, the largest military assault in human history. The attack, he learned, was set for June 22, 1941. But the Kremlin doubted him. Stalin, hardened by years of paranoia, believed Hitler would never break the non-aggression pact, not while Britain still resisted in the West. Disinformation, Stalin scrawled on the report. Do not believe. Sorge tried again. He gathered confirmation from multiple sources inside the German diplomatic staff. He sent message after message, warning, pleading, certain that every second counted. He sent message after message, warning, pleading, certain that every second counted. Still, Moscow refused to act. Then came the dawn of June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa began. 3 million German soldiers stormed across the Soviet border. Cities burned, armies shattered, millions died in the first months. And in Moscow, someone finally whispered, Sorge was right. Yet even as Europe burned, Sorge kept working. He had one last crucial mission, one final message that would save his homeland. Should it join Germany and attack the Soviet Union from the east, or move southward toward the Pacific colonies of Britain and the United States? If Japan struck north, the Soviets would collapse under a two-front war. If Japan struck south, the USSR would survive, free to move its eastern armies westward against the Nazis. From his position within the German embassy, Sorge learned the truth. Japan's war planners, led by the Imperial Army General Staff, had decided to go south, towards Southeast Asia, not Siberia. Tokyo would not attack the Soviet Union. On September 14, 1941, Sorge sent what became the most important message of his life. Japan will not attack the Soviet Union this year. Forces will move southward after October. That single sentence changed everything. When Stalin received the report, this time verified and trusted, he made a decision that altered the war. He transferred over 20 divisions, 1,700 tanks, and 1,500 aircraft from Siberia to the west. Those troops arrived just in time to defend Moscow against the German invasion in December 1941. Historians would later say, without Richard Sorge, the Soviet capital might have fallen. Yet while his information saved millions, Sorge himself was already walking into the shadows of his own fate. The Japanese police, the feared Tokubetsu Koto Keisatsu, or Special Hire Police, had begun to close in. Radio signals were being traced. Suspicion grew around foreign journalists and political circles. A net was tightening around the man who had outsmarted empires for nearly a decade. But Richard Sorge did not know how to stop. Even as danger approached, he continued to transmit reports. His network still met, still planned, still risked everything for one more message. On October 18th, 1941, just a month after sending his most critical report, Sorge attended a party at the German embassy. He laughed, toasted with the ambassador, and danced until late. Outside in the dark, Japanese agents were already waiting. By dawn, the trap would close. October 1941. Tokyo slept beneath the glow of lanterns, unaware that the greatest spy in its midst was about to be caught. Richard Sorge, the charming journalist who drank with German diplomats and advised Japanese politicians, had no inkling that the shadows were closing in. For nearly 8 years, he had lived a life of deception, weaving a web that spanned continents. He had infiltrated embassies, manipulated officials, and reported intelligence that would save Moscow. And yet, one single slip, one moment of chance, could undo everything. It began with a radio transmission. Sorge's team, despite years of careful operation, had begun to draw attention. The Japanese police, the feared Tokubetsu Koto Keisatsu, had detected irregular signals and patterns. They began tracing them to their source, quietly observing, waiting. On the night of October 18th, 1941, Sorge attended a gathering at the German embassy. He laughed, toasted, and smoked, unaware that officers were already surveilling him. By dawn, a team would move silently through Tokyo's streets, ready to seize the man who had outwitted 2 empires. Sorge returned home, as usual, after a night of espionage masquerading as pleasure. He wrote reports, logged information, and prepared to transmit the last critical intelligence to Moscow. Before he could send his next message, agents burst into his apartment. Sorge, ever composed, did not resist. His hands were steady, his expression calm, almost defiant. He knew what awaited him. The Japanese police arrested him quietly but firmly. Sorge was interrogated immediately. For months, he faced relentless questioning, beatings, and psychological pressure. Yet he never wavered. He never betrayed his contacts, never revealed the identities of Hotsumi Ozaki or his radio operators. Ozaki, captured shortly after Sorge, endured the same fate. Together, they were symbols of loyalty, courage, and the dangerous truth that even in wartime, some men valued principle above survival. Sorge's interrogation was meticulous. The Japanese officers were intelligent, methodical, convinced they were unraveling the life of a foreign agitator. He understood that his silence could save lives, and potentially, the course of the war itself. During the long months of captivity, Sorge reflected on his life. He thought of Baku, of the trenches of World War I, of Moscow, and its endless winter, of Berlin's political chaos. He thought of Tokyo, the city he had loved, manipulated, and ultimately betrayed by simply existing in it. In prison, Sorge remained defiant in small ways. He continued to read, to write, to plan, mentally keeping his network alive even as his body was confined. He knew the world outside would never fully understand what he had done, and perhaps that was as it should be. As 1942 arrived, Sorge's health began to decline. Isolation, malnutrition, and the relentless psychological strain wore him down. Yet he never broke. He never admitted to being a spy for the Soviets in a way that could endanger others. The Allies were struggling in Europe and the Pacific. The Soviet Union was barely surviving Hitler's invasion. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, Sorge's prior intelligence had already shaped crucial decisions in Moscow. Stalin's ability to shift divisions from Siberia to the Western Front, informed by Sorge's reports, had saved the Soviet capital. Even in captivity, Sorge's work was echoing across continents, altering battles he could not witness. Throughout 1943, Sorge remained under close watch. The Japanese authorities debated what to do with him. He was a foreigner, a high-value spy, and politically sensitive. Any trial or public exposure risked diplomatic fallout. Yet, in the shadows of Tokyo, they prepared a secret resolution. Sorge's messages from the past continued to circulate clandestinely, reaching Moscow through channels the Japanese could not fully trace. He became a ghost in history, a man whose deeds were invisible to the world, yet felt in armies and capitals thousands of miles away. By the end of 1943, the Japanese authorities made a chilling decision. Sorge and Ozaki were to be executed. The date was set, the prison prepared, the gallows constructed. They were to die quietly, without spectacle, the kind of death that would erase their existence from official memory. Even as the war approached its final chapters, Sorge's mind remained clear. He thought not of escape, not of survival, but of the consequences of his silence. Every word he had withheld, every name he had protected, was a thread in a tapestry of intelligence that had already shifted the fate of nations. Sorge had become a legend in his own lifetime, though no one outside Moscow knew it. On November 7th, 1944, the day marked by revolution in Russia, Richard Sorge was executed in Sugamo Prison, Tokyo. He was 49 years old. His final act was quiet, dignified, and true to his life. A man who had lived and died in the service of secrets far greater than himself. He was posthumously honored by the Soviet Union in 1964, recognized as a hero whose intelligence had shaped history. But for decades, he remained unknown outside the shadows of espionage, a man who altered the course of World War II while remaining invisible to the world he saved. Richard Sorge's life is a study in contrasts, charm and deception, loyalty and betrayal, courage and death. He walked among nations, carried their secrets, and gave everything, including his life, for a cause larger than himself. November 7th, 1944. The day marked by revolution in Russia became the day Richard Sorge disappeared from the world of the living. Sugamo Prison in Tokyo fell silent after the execution of the spy who had moved nations with nothing more than words, observations, and coded messages. Yet while Sorge's life had ended, his influence endured. The world did not yet know his name, and Tokyo celebrated little of his passing. But Moscow remembered, and history, though slow to recognize heroes in the shadows, eventually did too. Sorge's intelligence had been pivotal. His early warnings of Operation Barbarossa allowed Stalin to reposition divisions from Siberia to defend Moscow. The Soviet Union survived its darkest hour not solely through armies and generals, but through the quiet courage of a man thousands of miles away, reporting the truth from the heart of the Japanese Empire. Hotsumi Ozaki, his loyal Japanese ally, had perished alongside him. The network of operatives Sorge had built, the intricate web of contacts, radios and messengers, had been dismantled. And yet, the consequences of their actions rippled across the Pacific and Eurasia. After the war, in the ashes of Europe and Asia, historians began to piece together fragments of what had happened. Occasionally, documents surfaced, reports sent to Moscow, testimonies from former diplomats, and intelligence records, painting the silhouette of a man who had been everywhere and nowhere, visible only to those who knew how to look. In 1964, the Soviet Union formally recognized Sorge's sacrifice. He was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. A small ceremony commemorated the man who had given everything in the name of a cause far larger than any single life. Tokyo, too, began to remember. A modest stone monument stands in Setagaya, marking the site of his execution. Its inscription is simple. Here died Richard Sorge, who loved peace and gave his life for it. For decades, few outside the world of intelligence knew of him. He was a ghost in the history books, a shadow whose life seemed almost too strange to be true. But to those who study espionage, Richard Sorge represents the pinnacle of skill, courage, and calculated audacity. Sorge's methods, the blend of charm, infiltration, psychological acuity, and relentless observation, remain a model for modern intelligence agencies. His life demonstrates that wars are not only won on battlefields, but in whispers, letters, and coded transmissions. The legacy of Sorge extends beyond wartime intelligence. He is a reminder that one individual, working quietly and strategically, can alter the course of history. He shows that information, knowledge, can be as deadly as a cannon, as decisive as a tank, as unstoppable as a storm. In Moscow, he is celebrated as a hero. In Tokyo, as a shadow of the past. In the broader world, he is almost unknown, yet every strategic move, every successful counterintelligence operation since the 1940s carries the echo of his example. Modern spies, diplomats, and intelligence officers study his life, seeking lessons in courage and ingenuity. They learn from his ability to balance audacity with caution, charm with secrecy, and observation with discretion. Richard Sorge's story also teaches the human cost of espionage. He was isolated for years, confined to a prison cell in a foreign land. He faced physical abuse, psychological torment, and ultimate death, yet never broke. He died not because of weakness or error, but because he was the perfect spy in an imperfect world. His name reminds us that intelligence work carries a profound moral weight. Every decision, every transmission, every lie, every betrayal of trust affects not only governments, but lives. Sorge's choices saved millions, yet cost him his own life. In his story, one sees both the heroism and tragedy of the clandestine world. And perhaps that is why he continues to fascinate historians, filmmakers, and writers. Because Richard Sorge was more than a spy. He was a man who understood the fragility of nations, the importance of truth, and the enormous power of a single determined individual. Today, scholars, intelligence analysts, and enthusiasts remember Sorge not just as a Soviet spy in Japan, but as a man who bridged worlds, who walked unnoticed among empires, and who ultimately changed the trajectory of history. His life poses a question still relevant in our modern age. How much influence can one person exert from the shadows? How far can truth travel when hidden beneath lies? Richard Sorge lived, acted, and died as if he were invisible, yet his impact remains undeniable. From Moscow to Tokyo, from the battlefields of the Soviet Union to the halls of intelligence agencies around the world, his legacy endures. He reminds us that in war, it is not only the soldiers on the front lines who determine outcomes. Sometimes it is the quiet, invisible observer, the spy who walks unnoticed, who shapes history more profoundly than any army, any weapon, or any treaty. Richard Sorge, the spy who knew Japan's secret, the man who gave his life to preserve a nation, and the shadow whose whispers echoed across the world. History may forget him at times, but his deeds will never fade.